The elderly man's hands trembled as he counted out quarters on the convenience store counter, the small pile of silver growing painfully slowly. "Sorry about this," he whispered, his weathered face flushed with shame as impatient customers sighed loudly behind him. The cashier rolled her eyes and checked her watch, making no effort to hide her annoyance as the old man struggled to pay for his basic groceries and heart medication. His faded Vietnam veteran cap sat crooked on his thinning white hair. Once worn proudly, but now seeming to shrink with him as the public humiliation continued. No one offered to help. No one stepped forward. But then the bell above the door chimed, and the entire store fell silent, as a tall figure in a crisp military uniform strode purposefully toward the counter, his face a mask of controlled emotion. What shocking truth would this uniformed stranger reveal about the humble old man that would leave the entire town speechless? Subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us. Raymond Wilson continued counting his quarters with shaking fingers, each clink against the counter marking another moment of his public shame. The line behind him had grown to 6 people, their collective impatience a tangible force pressing against his bent shoulders. "Sir, we have other customers waiting," the cashier said, not bothering to mask her irritation. Her name tag read Melissa, though she had offered Raymond none of the courtesy that usually accompanied an introduction. "Almost there," Raymond mumbled, his voice barely audible above the convenience store's buzzing fluorescent lights. He had exactly $47.83 in quarters, his entire week's spending money carefully collected from the jar he kept on his kitchen counter. The heart medication alone was 42,190 snorers. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the tension. The sound drew Raymond's attention away from his counting, and for a moment the quarters stopped their rhythmic progression across the counter. The man who entered stood tall in a perfectly pressed army dress uniform, captain's bars gleaming on his shoulders. His presence commanded immediate attention, and the store fell into a sudden, respectful silence. Even Melissa straightened her posture slightly, her annoyance temporarily replaced by curiosity. Captain James Mercer had not intended to stop at the convenience store. He was on his way to give a presentation at the local high school about military service when he needed to pick up a bottle of water. What he found instead was a scene that made his jaw tighten. James recognized the Vietnam veteran cap immediately. His own father had worn one just like it. He also recognized the particular kind of silence that had fallen over the store, the uncomfortable quiet of people witnessing something they knew was wrong, but choosing not to intervene. The elderly veteran's hands shook more violently now as he fumbled with the quarters, clearly distressed by the attention his presence was creating. A quarter slipped from his fingers and rolled across the floor, coming to rest near James's polished dress shoe. James stepped forward, bending to retrieve the coin. As he approached the counter, he could see the veteran's groceries: bread, peanut, butter, canned soup, and a small prescription bag from the pharmacy counter. The basics of survival being paid for with what must have been painstakingly saved loose change. "Sir," James said, addressing the elderly man with the same respect he would show a superior officer. Raymond looked up, startled by the formal address. His eyes, faded blue and rimmed with red, widened at the sight of the uniform. Almost instinctively, his posture straightened slightly, muscle memory from decades past. "Allow me," James continued, placing the quarter he'd retrieved on the counter. And standing beside Raymond, the store was completely silent now. A teenager who had been texting furiously put down her phone to watch. The businessman who had been sighing loudly suddenly found great interest in a rack of beef jerky. Melissa behind the counter seemed unsure how to proceed. "That's really not necessary," Raymond said, but his protest lacked conviction. The strain of the situation had left him exhausted, his dignity hanging by a thread. James simply nodded, understanding the pride that came with the veteran cap, and waited. There was a code among those who served, an unspoken understanding that transcended the decades between their service. James would not force help where it wasn't wanted, but he would not walk away either. Raymond hesitated, then gave a slight nod of acceptance. It was barely perceptible, but it was enough. "How much more does he need?" James asked Melissa, his tone making it clear that her previous attitude had been noted. $11.24, she replied, her voice softer now. Without hesitation, James pulled out his wallet and placed a $20 bill on the counter. "Please complete this gentleman's purchase and return his quarters to him," James said, his voice carrying the natural authority of command. No one in the store made a sound. The transaction that had been the source of such impatience just moments ago was now the center of a very different kind of attention. Melissa rang up Raymond's items with newfound efficiency, her earlier impatience replaced by an awkward attentiveness. The store remained unnaturally quiet as she bagged the groceries and medication, then counted back Raymond's quarters into a small paper bag. "Your change from the 20 is $8.76, she said to James, holding out the bills and coins. "Please add that to the gentleman's quarters," James replied, never taking his eyes off Raymond. The elderly veteran stood a bit straighter now, though his weathered hand still trembled slightly as he accepted the two bags, one with his purchases, one with his returned money. His eyes, clouded with cataracts but sharp with intelligence, met James's gaze directly for the first time. "Thank you, Captain," Raymond said, his voice steadier than before. He'd noted the rank immediately, despite his deteriorating vision. "But you didn't need to do that." James offered a respectful nod. "No, sir, I didn't need to. I wanted to." A subtle exchange passed between them, unspoken but profound, the recognition that exists only between those who have worn the uniform, regardless of era or branch of service. The businessman who had been sighing dramatically minutes earlier now hovered uncertainly by the beef jerky display, suddenly in no hurry to make his purchase. The teenager who had pocketed her phone was watching with undisguised interest. An older woman near the refrigerated section clutched her purse tightly, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. "Raymond Wilson," the veteran said, quietly offering his name instead of his hand, which was occupied with the bags. "Captain James Mercer, 10th Mountain Division," James replied with a slight incline of his head. "May I assist you with those bags, Mr. Wilson?" Raymond hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The bags weren't heavy, but the arthritis in his hands made gripping them painful. Still, he'd been managing on his own for decades. "I'm parked just outside," Raymond finally conceded. As the two men moved toward the exit, Melissa called out, "Have a nice day," her voice carrying a note of forced cheerfulness that hadn't been present during their transaction. Neither man acknowledged her. James held the door open, and the bright morning sunlight illuminated Raymond's face, revealing deep lines carved by years of hardship and resilience. His Vietnam veteran cap, faded and frayed at the edges, bore the insignia of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, the Sky Soldiers, who had seen some of the conflict's most brutal fighting. James noted this detail silently as they approached a rusted 1992 Ford Taurus parked at the far end of the lot. The car, like its owner, showed signs of having endured far more than its designed lifespan. "This is me," Raymond said, stopping beside the vehicle. He set his bags down carefully to search for his keys. "The 173rd saw heavy action," James commented, conversationally, though both men understood the weight behind the observation. Raymond's hand stilled momentarily as he looked up at the younger officer. Yes, we did." A passing car honked at someone in the parking lot, breaking the moment. Raymond located his keys and unlocked the Taurus with some difficulty, the lock sticking as it often did. "Do you live far from here, Mr. Wilson?" James asked, helping place the bags on the passenger seat. "About 3 miles, over on Maple Street." Raymond settled himself behind the wheel, the springs of the old driver's seat groaning in familiar protest. James stood at attention, almost unconsciously, as the older veteran prepared to leave. "It was an honor to meet you, sir," Raymond started. The car, the engine coughing twice before catching. He looked up at James with eyes that had seen too much and been thanked too little. Likewise, Captain. He paused, then added, "They don't make many stops like this anymore." As Raymond pulled away, James remained at attention, showing the respect that the convenience store patrons had failed to offer. Through the rearview mirror, Raymond watched the tall figure in uniform grow smaller, an unexpected moment of dignity. In what had begun as another day of invisibility, neither man knew that their brief encounter would be only the beginning. James watched the rusted Taurus pull away, its muffler rattling ominously as it merged into traffic. He had intended to simply buy a bottle of water and continue to the high school where he was scheduled to speak about military careers. Instead, he found himself reaching for his phone and dialing the school's administrative office. "This is Captain Mercer. I'm afraid I'll be running about 30 minutes late for my presentation this morning. An unexpected situation has come up." After a brief conversation, he pocketed his phone and returned to his own vehicle, a modest but well-maintained Chevrolet Impala. Something about Raymond Wilson troubled him deeply. The man's dignity amid humiliation, the careful counting of quarters for essential medication, the faded cap that spoke of service and sacrifice, it all painted a picture that James couldn't reconcile with how the veteran had been treated. James found himself following the Taurus at a discreet distance. His instincts, honed through 2 tours in Afghanistan, told him something wasn't right. 3 miles to Maple Street, Raymond had said. James would make sure he got there safely, then continue to his appointment. But halfway there, the Taurus sputtered and jerked before rolling to a stop on the shoulder of the road. James pulled in behind it and approached cautiously as Raymond attempted to restart the engine. After 3 failed attempts, the elderly veteran rested his forehead against the steering wheel in a moment of defeat. A gentle tap on the window startled him. Raymond looked up to find Captain Mercer standing outside his car. "Car trouble?" James asked. As Raymond rolled down his window manually, "Just needs a minute to cool down," Raymond replied, though his expression suggested this was a familiar and recurring problem. "It'll start up again." James glanced at his watch. "I'm heading toward town. Can I give you a lift the rest of the way?" Raymond's pride was evident in his hesitation, but the groceries included perishables, and the day was warming quickly. "I appreciate that, Captain, but it's not necessary. I've walked it plenty of times." "I understand, sir," James said, respecting the man's independence, "but I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd accept the ride. I've got some time before my next appointment." After a moment's consideration, Raymond nodded and carefully gathered his bags. The transfer to James's car was accomplished with minimal conversation, each man understanding the delicate balance between offering and accepting help. As they drove, James noted Raymond's directions led them toward an increasingly run-down area of town. Maple Street turned out to be lined with aging apartment buildings, their once bright facades now faded and in need of repair. "Third building on the left," Raymond instructed. "You can just drop me at the front." James pulled up to a 3-story walk-up with cracked concrete steps and a security door that hung slightly askew on its hinges. "This is home?" "For the past 12 years, Raymond confirmed. "Second floor, apartment 2B. It's not much, but the rent's manageable on my pension." The mention of a pension raised questions in James's mind, but he kept them to himself as he helped Raymond with his bags to the building entrance. "I can take it from here," Raymond said, reaching for the door. James hesitated. "Would you mind if I helped you up with these? I noticed your hands giving you some trouble earlier." Raymond studied the younger man's face, searching for pity, but finding only genuine concern. "All right. The elevator's been out for a month, so we'll have to take the stairs." The climb was slow, with Raymond pausing twice to catch his breath. James maintained a respectful distance, neither rushing nor hovering, allowing the older man his dignity while remaining ready to assist if needed. Apartment 2B was at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Raymond fumbled with his keys again before managing to unlock the door. He pushed it open to reveal a small, meticulously organized living space. Despite the building's exterior condition, the apartment was immaculately clean, if sparsely furnished. A neatly made twin bed occupied one Corner, a small kitchen table with 2 chairs stood in another. The walls were largely bare except for a single-framed photograph of a much younger Raymond in uniform, standing beside a smiling woman with warm eyes and dark hair. "My wife, Eleanor," Raymond explained, following James's gaze. "Been gone 15 years now." James set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, taking in the modest surroundings. A bookshelf held carefully arranged military history volumes. A small television that must have been at least 20 years old sat on a simple stand. "Thank you for the ride, Captain," Raymond said, clearly signaling the end of their interaction. "And for your help at the store?" James nodded, respecting the dismissal. "It was no trouble, Mr. Wilson." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to call." Raymond accepted the card with a slight nod but made no promises to use it. As James turned to leave, his eye caught something partially visible on a small side table, a shadow box containing what appeared to be military medals. Before he could get a better look, Raymond shifted position, inadvertently blocking his view. "I should let you get to your appointment," Raymond said. "Those high school kids will be waiting." James nodded and headed for the door, his curiosity piqued but his respect for the veteran's privacy stronger. "Take care, Mr. Wilson." After Captain Mercer left, Raymond carefully put away his groceries, organizing each item with methodical precision. The small refrigerator hummed loudly in the quiet apartment as he placed the perishables inside. He set his heart medication on the kitchen counter next to 7 other pill bottles, each one labeled and arranged in the order he needed to take them throughout the day. His routine never varied. Up at 5:30 a.m., a habit formed during basic training in 1968 and never broken. Breakfast, usually instant oatmeal, followed by his morning medications. Then an hour spent reading the newspaper, if he could afford it that week, or rereading one of his military history books if he couldn't. Raymond moved to the small bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. The mirror revealed what the years had done. Thinning white hair, deep lines around his eyes, skin loosened by age and hardened by experience. He barely recognized himself sometimes, the young paratrooper from the photograph, now just a distant memory. He changed out of his town clothes into more comfortable, worn khakis and a faded flannel shirt. His good clothes, the ones he'd worn. To the store were reserved for trips outside the apartment, a small dignity he maintained despite his circumstances. Raymond sat heavily in his recliner, the only truly comfortable piece of furniture he owned. Eleanor had insisted on buying it when his back pain had become chronic in his 60s. "Every old soldier deserves a throne," she'd said, with that smile that still visited him in dreams. The shadow box on the side table caught his eye, the one Captain Mercer had noticed earlier. Raymond reached for it, running his fingers over the glass. Inside were his service medals, a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and an empty space where another medal should have been. The space had remained empty. "For over 50 years, never did make it right, did they, Ellie?" he murmured to the empty room. His thoughts drifted back to 1969, to the hills outside Dak To, the monsoon rain pouring down as his unit moved through triple canopy jungle. The ambush had been sudden, devastating. He'd dragged 3 wounded men to safety under heavy fire, been hit twice himself. Later, there had been talk of a Silver Star, but then came the confusion, the paperwork lost during unit transfers, the changing command structures. By the time he rotated home, the matter had been forgotten by everyone except those who had been there that day. Eleanor had been his salvation when he returned. While other veterans faced protests and scorn, she had welcomed him with unwavering love. They'd built a life together, modest but meaningful. He'd worked construction, then as a machinist, until his injuries caught up with him. They'd never had children. The doctors said the Agent Orange exposure might have been the reason. When Eleanor died of cancer in 2010, the light had gone out of his world. The medical bills had drained their small savings, forcing him to sell their house and move into this apartment. His military pension and Social Security barely covered the essentials. Raymond's gaze moved to the television. He turned it on mostly for the company, the voices filling the emptiness of the apartment. A news program discussed veterans' issues, budget cuts to VA services, the backlog of benefits claims, homelessness among Vietnam veterans. The same stories, different day. He thought about the morning's humiliation at the convenience store, a small incident in a long pattern of invisibility. The world moved on, forgetting the sacrifices of men like him. Sometimes he felt like a ghost, haunting the margins of a society that preferred not to see him. But Captain Mercer had seen him. The young officer's respect had been genuine, untainted by pity. It reminded Raymond of a brotherhood he'd once known, when men had stood shoulder to shoulder against the world. Raymond picked up the business card the captain had left. James Mercer, Captain, U.S. Army, 10th Mountain Division. Below that, a phone number and email address. He placed the card carefully on the side table, not ready to admit he might use it, but unwilling to discard it. The afternoon stretched before him, identical to thousands that had come before. He would make his simple lunch at noon, take his midday medications, perhaps walk to the small park 3 blocks away if his knee wasn't bothering him too much, watch the evening news, make dinner, soup from a can tonight, take his evening pills, read until his eyes grew tired, sleep if the nightmares allowed it. Tomorrow would bring the same routine, broken only by his weekly trip to the convenience store for supplies and his monthly visit to the VA hospital for checkups. A life of quiet routine, of fading into the background. Raymond glanced again at the photo of himself and Eleanor. They had been so young, so full of hope for the future. He touched the frame gently. "Strange morning, Ellie," he said softly. "Someone saw me today, really saw me." Outside his window, life in the small town continued, oblivious to the hero in their midst. Raymond Wilson, once a paratrooper who had saved lives in the jungles of Vietnam, now just an old man counting quarters at a convenience store counter. But for the first time in years, someone had noticed. And unknown to Raymond, that simple act of recognition was about to change everything. Captain James Mercer arrived at Riverdale High School 35 minutes late for his presentation. He apologized to the staff and students, explaining that he had been delayed by helping a veteran in need. The high school principal, a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of character we want our students to see in military leadership," she said, escorting him to the auditorium. James delivered his standard presentation about military career paths and opportunities, but his mind kept drifting back to Raymond Wilson. The stark contrast between the respect James received in his uniform and the invisibility Raymond experienced despite his service nagged at him throughout the day. After finishing at the high school, James drove to the local armory where he had an office as part of his recruiting duty assignment. Instead of catching up on paperwork, he opened his laptop and began searching for information on Raymond Wilson and the 173rd Airborne Brigade during Vietnam. The 173rd, he discovered, had been the first major U.S. Army ground formation deployed to Vietnam in May 1965. They had seen intense combat, including the brutal Battle of Dak To in 1967, where they suffered heavy casualties taking Hill 875. "Sergeant Raymond Wilson," James murmured, typing the name into the military records database he had access to. Several Raymond Wilsons appeared, but one matched the approximate age and unit. James clicked on the file. The basic service record showed an honorable discharge in 1970, Purple Heart and Bronze Star recipient. Nothing extraordinary jumped out at first glance, just one of thousands of young men who had served bravely and returned home to rebuild their lives. But something about the convenience store encounter didn't add up. Veterans with Raymond's service record typically received better benefits than what his living situation suggested. And there had been that empty space in the shadow box, a conspicuous absence among his medals. James picked up his phone and called an old friend who worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington. "Mike, it's James Mercer. I need a favor," he said when his friend answered. "Let me guess, another vet getting the runaround on benefits," Mike replied, the sound of shuffling papers in the background. "Maybe. I met a Vietnam vet today, 173rd Airborne, name's Raymond Wilson, lives in pretty rough conditions for someone with his service record. I'm wondering if there's more to his story." "You know I can't share personal records, James," Mike said, his voice lowering. "Privacy regulations. I'm not asking for his medical information, just trying to understand if there's a reason he seems to have fallen through the cracks." There was a pause on the line. "Send me what you know. I'll see what's in the system." Off the record, James thanked him and ended the call. He sat back in his chair, staring at Raymond's basic service information on his screen. Something told him there was more to Raymond Wilson than a simple case of a veteran struggling with benefits. His office phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. "Captain Mercer," he answered. "Captain, this is Melissa from Quick Stop on Main Street." The voice was hesitant, uncertain. "You were in this morning? Helped the elderly gentleman with his purchase?" James straightened in his chair. "Yes, I remember. What can I do for you, Melissa?" "My manager saw the security footage and, well, he wants to speak with you about doing something for Mr. Wilson. A kind of apology, I guess." James raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unexpected call. "I'll stop by tomorrow morning. Please let your manager know." After hanging up, James turned back to his computer. He opened a more specialized military database that required his security credentials and searched for classified operations involving the 173rd Airborne near Dak To in 1969, the period when Raymond would have been serving. The search returned several redacted mission reports. Most contained minimal information due to their classified nature, but one report caught his attention. It referenced a small reconnaissance team that had been sent deep into enemy territory to rescue a downed pilot. The mission details were heavily redacted, but the words "above and beyond the call of duty" appeared in a section about the team's actions. What struck James was the list of team members. All names were blacked out except for the first initial and last name of each. Soldier. And there it was. R. Wilson, Sergeant, 173rd Airborne Brigade. James leaned back in his chair, pieces starting to fall into place. If Raymond had been part of a classified operation, it might explain the disconnect in his benefits and recognition. Sometimes paperwork got buried under security classifications, especially during the chaotic final years of the Vietnam War. As the office grew dark around him, James made a decision. Tomorrow, after visiting the convenience store, he would pay another visit to Raymond Wilson, not out of pity, but out of a growing conviction that a fellow soldier had been denied the recognition and support he deserved. James gathered his things and locked his office. As he walked to his car, he thought about the empty space in Raymond's shadow box. What metal should have been there, and why, after all these years, was it still missing? 3 days after their first encounter, James found himself climbing the stairs to Raymond's apartment. He had visited the convenience store as promised, where the manager had awkwardly proposed a Veterans Appreciation Discount program, clearly a hastily conceived attempt to save face after the incident. James had accepted the gesture with diplomatic grace, but made it clear that respect for veterans should be a daily practice, not a reaction to public embarrassment. Now, standing outside, apartment 2B with a small box of donuts and 2 coffees, James hesitated before knocking. Was he overstepping? Raymond hadn't invited further contact. But the questions surrounding the veteran's service record and current circumstances compelled him forward. His knuckles rapped against the worn door. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the shuffling of feet and the sound of a security chain being removed. Raymond opened the door, surprise evident on his weathered face. He wore the same khakis as before, but with a different flannel shirt, blue instead of green. His white hair was neatly combed, and he stood straighter today. as if the apartment's familiar surroundings granted him more confidence than the public setting of their first meeting. "Captain Mercer," Raymond said, his tone neither welcoming nor dismissive. "I wasn't expecting visitors," James offered a respectful nod. "I apologize for dropping by unannounced, Mr. Wilson. I brought coffee and donuts if you're interested in some company this morning." Raymond studied him with eyes that had seen far too much of the world's ugliness to be easily trusting. After a moment's consideration, he stepped back from the doorway. "Come in then, though I can't imagine why you'd want to spend your morning with an old man." James entered, setting the coffee and donuts on the small kitchen table. Professional. Curiosity, perhaps. One soldier to another. Raymond's expression remained guarded as he gestured for James to take a seat. "I was just a grunt who did his tour and came home. Nothing special about that story." James removed the coffee cups from their carrier, sliding one toward Raymond. "Cream and sugar?" I guessed. "Black would have been fine," Raymond said, but he accepted the coffee without further comment. The apartment looked much the same as it had during James's brief visit days earlier, though he noticed the shadow box with the medals had been moved from the side table to a shelf above the television, slightly less visible to visitors. "The 173rd saw some of the worst fighting of the war," James said, carefully selecting a neutral opening. "Hill, 875, Operation Junction City." Raymond sipped his coffee, his eyes distant. "You've been reading up on ancient history, Captain?" "History has always interested me, especially the parts they don't teach in the classroom." A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed Raymond's face. "Some history is best left in the past." James chose a chocolate-glazed donut from the box, but didn't immediately eat it. "I visited the convenience store yesterday. The manager is implementing a veterans discount program." Raymond snorted softly. "Bit late for that." "Better late than never," some might say. And others might say, it's just covering his ass after being caught treating a veteran poorly. Raymond's bluntness carried no bitterness, just a pragmatic assessment of human nature. James smiled slightly. That too. They ate in silence for a moment, the simple act of sharing food establishing a tentative connection between the decades that separated their service. "I'm stationed at Fort Dix now," James offered. "Recruiting duty. Not what I signed up for, but important work." "Getting harder to fill the ranks these days?" Raymond asked. "Different challenges than in your time. No draft now. Everyone who serves chooses to be there." Raymond nodded, considering this. Probably better that way. James decided to approach his real purpose more directly. "Mr. Wilson, I couldn't help but notice your medal display the other day." Raymond's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Just trinkets from another life. Bronze Star and Purple Heart aren't just trinkets. They represent significant service and sacrifice." "What's your question, Captain?" Raymond's directness cut through the careful approach. James met the older man's gaze steadily. "I noticed an empty space in your display, a missing medal." Raymond set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Not missing, never received. May I ask what it was meant to be?" For a long moment, Raymond simply studied James, as if weighing his trustworthiness. Then, with a slight sigh, he stood and retrieved the shadow box from the shelf. He set it on the table between them. "Silver Star," he said quietly. "At least, that's what they told me was coming for an operation near Dak To in '69. James nodded, his suspicions confirmed. "Special reconnaissance mission?" Raymond's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been digging deep, Captain. Just trying to understand." Raymond returned to his seat, leaving the shadow box on the table. "It was classified. Still might be, for all I know. We went in to extract a pilot shot down in Laos, technically a place we weren't supposed to be operating. The mission was successful. We got him out. Lost 2 men doing it." Raymond's voice remained steady, but his hands had begun to tremble slightly. "When we returned to base, the brass said we'd all be recognized for the action. Silver Stars were mentioned, but they never came." Raymond shrugged. "Things got complicated. Mission officially never happened. Can't give medals for operations that don't exist on paper." James leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Wilson, records like that get declassified eventually. It might be possible to—" I'm not interested in fighting bureaucrats at my age, Raymond interrupted. It's just a piece of metal. But something in his eyes told James it was much more than that. It was recognition of sacrifice, acknowledgement of courage, restoration of honor. Sometimes the system makes mistakes, James said carefully. Sometimes those mistakes can be corrected. Raymond studied him for a long moment. You're an idealist, Captain Mercer. The Army will beat that out of you eventually. James smiled slightly. They've been trying for 12 years now. Hasn't worked yet. The ghost of a smile crossed Raymond's face, the first James had seen. It transformed his features briefly, offering a glimpse of the young paratrooper he had once been. Well, Raymond said, reaching for another donut, your coffee's getting cold. James spent the next week digging through military archives. His friend Mike at the VA had come through with additional information, not Raymond's personal medical records, but documentation about benefit applications and appeals. The pattern was troubling. Raymond had filed for increased benefits 3 times over the past 15 years, each time citing service-connected disabilities. Each application had been denied due to insufficient documentation of service-related incidents. Today, James had taken personal leave to visit the National Archives facility in Philadelphia, where Vietnam-era military records were stored. The archivist, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a meticulous manner, had been skeptical at first. Most of these records require formal requests with significant lead time, he explained, eyeing James's uniform. Even for military personnel, James nodded. I understand, but I'm looking into a possible oversight regarding a Silver Star recommendation from 1969. A veteran in my community may have been denied proper recognition due to the classified nature of the operation. The archivist's expression softened slightly. Name and unit? Sergeant Raymond Wilson, 173rd Airborne Brigade. Served near Dak Tu in 1969. The search took hours. James waited patiently as the archivist disappeared into the labyrinth of shelves and filing systems, occasionally returning to ask clarifying questions before vanishing again. By mid-afternoon, when James was beginning to lose hope, the archivist returned with a thin folder. Most of the operational details are still redacted, he said, placing the folder on the table. But I found this in a batch of recently declassified materials. It was misfiled under administrative records rather than commendations. James opened the folder carefully. Inside was a faded carbon copy of a Silver Star recommendation form. The top section contained Raymond's name and service details. The middle section described, in carefully sanitized language, extraordinary heroism while engaged with hostile forces. The specific location had been redacted, but the date matched the period Raymond had mentioned. Most revealing was a handwritten note in the margin. Award held pending security review. Operation Southpaw. Remains classified. Reassess status 1975. Operation Southpaw, James murmured. The archivist nodded. Cross-border operations were politically sensitive. Some never officially existed. Was there any follow-up? Any indication this was revisited in 1975? The archivist shook his head. If there was, it's not with these records. By 1975, Vietnam had fallen, and the military was dealing with the aftermath of a deeply unpopular war. Many loose ends were never tied up. James photographed the documents with his phone, thanked the archivist, and headed back to his car. His next stop was Fort Dix, where he had access to more current military databases. In his office, James searched for Operation Southpaw. The first attempts yielded nothing, but when he added Raymond's name and unit designator, a heavily redacted report appeared. Most details were still classified, but a section listing personnel included Sergeant R. Wilson along with 5 other team members. 2 names had gold stars beside them, indicating they had been killed in action. The mission summary was brief. Team successfully extracted HVT from denied territory after navigating 20 kilometers of hostile ground, encountered significant enemy resistance. 2 KIA, 1 WIA, target secured and transported to friendly forces. HVT, high-value target. In this case, likely the downed pilot Raymond had mentioned. James leaned back in his chair, processing what he'd discovered. Raymond and his team at Ha ventured into denied territory, Laos or possibly Cambodia, on a mission that officially didn't exist. They'd rescued a pilot, losing 2 team members in the process. Raymond had been recommended for a Silver Star, but the award had been held up due to the classified nature of the operation. When the time came to revisit the commendation, the chaos of the war's end had apparently buried it. A simple administrative oversight had denied Raymond proper recognition for extraordinary courage. And without official acknowledgement of his actions, his subsequent benefit claims had been rejected, leaving him to struggle on a basic pension despite service-connected disabilities. James picked up his phone and called Colonel Harrington, his commanding officer. "Sir, I need to discuss a matter concerning a Vietnam veteran who may have been denied proper recognition due to classified operations. This sounds official, Mercer. Come by my office tomorrow at 900. Thank you, sir." James ended the call and gathered the documents he'd collected. The system had failed Raymond Wilson, but it wasn't too late to make it right. The military prided itself on never leaving a man behind. That principle shouldn't end when the uniform came off. As he drove home that evening, James thought about Raymond's modest apartment, his careful counting of quarters for medication, his quiet dignity in the face of public humiliation. How different might his life have been if he'd received the recognition and benefits he'd earned through his sacrifice? The injustice of it burned in James's chest. Raymond Wilson had risked everything for his country, venturing into enemy territory, to save a fellow American when such operations were denied by the government. He'd lost friends, suffered wounds, and returned home to a nation that largely scorned Vietnam veterans. Then, through bureaucratic oversight, he'd been denied the honor and support he deserved. James pulled into his driveway, determination solidifying into resolution. This wasn't just about a medal anymore, it was about restoring dignity to a man who had given so much and asked for so little in return. Tomorrow he would begin the process of correcting a 50-year-old injustice. Raymond Wilson might not think he needed recognition anymore, but James was increasingly convinced that Raymond's community needed to know the hero who had been living quietly among them all these years. James spent the next few days observing Raymond's daily routine from a respectful distance. He wasn't stalking the veteran. He was trying to understand the full scope of the injustice that had shaped Raymond's civilian life. What he witnessed disturbed him deeply. On Tuesday morning, James sat in his car across from the local diner where Raymond had gone for breakfast. Through the window, he watched as the hostess seated the elderly veteran at a back table near the kitchen door, despite several better tables being available. The waitress took his order without making eye contact, her manner brusque and impersonal. When Raymond's food arrived, it was clearly not the same quality as what James saw being served to other patrons. His eggs overcooked, his toast barely warmed. Raymond ate without complaint, left an appropriate tip, and departed quietly. Not once did anyone engage him in conversation or acknowledge him beyond the minimum required for service. Later that day, James followed Raymond to the town's small public library. Here, at least, the librarian greeted Raymond by name with a genuine smile. Raymond spent 2 hours reading newspapers and military history books, seated in a worn armchair in the corner. James noticed that several patrons gave the veteran a wide berth, as if his faded Vietnam cap and aged appearance might somehow be contagious. On Wednesday, James observed Raymond at the VA clinic for his monthly checkup. The waiting room was crowded, the staff overworked. Raymond sat patiently for over 3 hours before being called, despite having an appointment time that had long since passed. Other, younger veterans were seen before him, though they had arrived later. When Raymond finally emerged, his face showed the strain of the long wait, but no surprise. This treatment was clearly nothing new to him. Thursday brought perhaps the most revealing incident. James had parked near the small park where Raymond sometimes walked. He watched as Raymond settled on a bench, tossing bits of bread to the pigeons. A group of teenagers entered the park laughing and joking loudly. When they spotted Raymond, their demeanor changed. "Hey, it's the crazy quarter guy." One of them called out just loud enough for Raymond to hear. Another mimicked an old man's trembling hands, counting imaginary coins while his friends laughed. None of them approached Raymond directly, but their mockery was unmistakable. A few. Adults in the park glanced over, but did nothing to intervene. Raymond didn't react. He continued feeding the birds, as if he hadn't heard, but James noticed how his shoulders hunched slightly, how his movements became more contained, as if trying to make himself less visible. James fought the urge to confront the teenagers. This wasn't about one incident or one group of disrespectful kids. It was about a pattern of invisibility and dismissal that Raymond faced every day. By Friday, James had seen enough. He met with Colonel Harrington as scheduled, presenting his findings about Raymond's service and the denied Silver Star. "It's more than just the medal, sir," James explained. "Without proper recognition of his service, Mr. Wilson has been denied increased benefits for service-connected disabilities. He's living on a basic pension that barely covers rent and medication." Colonel Harrington, a career officer with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for by-the-book leadership, studied the documents. This operation was cross-border, still sensitive, even after all these years. "But surely the classification period has expired, sir. It's been over 50 years. Some aspects may remain classified, but you're right. The basic facts of the mission could likely be acknowledged now." Harrington tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" "A formal review of Sergeant Wilson's service record, recognition of Operation Southpaw, awarding of the Silver Star that was recommended but never processed, and a review of his benefit situation." "That's a lot of bureaucracy to untangle." "Yes, sir, but it's the right thing to do." Harrington leaned back in his chair. "Why is this particular veteran so important to you, Mercer?" "There are thousands with similar stories." James considered the question carefully. "Because I witnessed his humiliation firsthand, sir. And because once I knew about the injustice, I couldn't unknow it. We tell recruits that the military takes care of its own. This is a chance to prove that's true, even 50 years later." After a long moment, Harrington nodded. "I'll make some calls. Start the process. But don't get your hopes up. These things move slowly, and there's no guarantee of the outcome." "Thank you, sir." As James left the colonel's office, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was Melissa from the convenience store. "Captain Mercer, there's a situation with Mr. Wilson at the store. Manager being very disrespectful. Thought you should know." James's jaw tightened as he hurried to his car. The bureaucratic process might take months, but Raymond Wilson needed an advocate now. The pattern of disrespect and indifference James had observed throughout the week wasn't just unkind. For a man who had risked everything for his country, it was deeply unjust. As he drove toward the convenience store, James thought about how quickly society forgot its promises to those who served. Raymond Wilson had been fighting an invisible war since returning home, not against foreign enemies, but against a system and community that had rendered him inconsequential. That was about to change. James arrived at the convenience store to find a tense standoff in progress. Raymond stood at the counter, his weathered face flushed with humiliation. Across from him, a heavy-set man in a polo shirt with "Manager" embroidered on the chest was speaking loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. "I don't care what Melissa told you about some veteran's discount. That's not official policy yet. And even if it was, we'd need proper military ID, not some ancient cap." Raymond's voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't ask for any discount. I just need to pay for my items." James approached quickly, his uniform creating an immediate shift in the atmosphere of the store. Customers who had been pretending not to notice the confrontation now watched openly. Melissa, behind a second register, shot James a grateful look. "Is there a problem here?" James asked, standing beside Raymond. The manager's demeanor changed instantly. "Captain, no problem at all. Just explaining our discount policy to Mr. Wilson, James supplied. Sergeant Raymond Wilson, 173rd Airborne Brigade, Vietnam veteran and Silver Star recipient. The last part wasn't officially true yet, but James said it with such conviction that no one would have questioned it. Raymond glanced at him sharply but remained silent. I see, the manager said, suddenly uncertain. Well, in that case, we can certainly extend our military discount today. That won't be necessary, James replied. Sergeant Wilson will pay the regular price, just as he intended, but I'd like a word with you privately after this transaction is complete. The manager swallowed visibly and nodded. James waited while Raymond paid for his items, then escorted him outside. I apologize for stepping in, Mr. Wilson, and for the embellishment about the Silver Star, but I couldn't stand by and watch that treatment continue. Raymond studied him for a long moment. You've been looking into my service record. It wasn't a question, but James nodded anyway. Yes, sir. I found documentation of Operation Southpaw and the Silver Star recommendation that was never processed due to classification issues. Raymond's expression revealed nothing, but his knuckles whitened around the plastic bag he carried. That was a long time ago, Captain. Not to me, James said simply, and not to the men you served with. Something flickered in Raymond's eyes. The men I served with are mostly dead now. Not all of them. James reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card. This is Colonel Michael Harrington, my commanding officer. He's initiated a formal review of your service record and the commendation that was never processed. Raymond stared at the card but made no move to take it. Why are you doing this? Because it's long overdue, and because no veteran should be treated the way you were just now, or the way I've seen you treated all week. Raymond's gaze sharpened. You've been watching me. Observing, James corrected. Trying to understand the situation fully before taking action. A hint of the soldier Raymond had once been emerged in his posture. I don't need saving, Captain. No, sir, you don't. But the system needs correcting, and I'm in a position to help make that happen. After a moment's hesitation, Raymond took the card. I've fought this battle before. The paperwork always disappears. Not this time, James promised. Colonel Harrington has contacts at the Pentagon, and I found the original recommendation. Form in the National Archives. Raymond's composure slipped slightly. You found the actual paperwork? Yes, sir. Misfiled but preserved, along with partial mission reports that have been declassified. Raymond was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he asked, What happens next? That depends partly on you. The review will proceed regardless, but it would help to have your cooperation. Your first-hand account of the operation would strengthen the case. I haven't talked about that mission in 50 years. I understand. Take some time to think about it. James glanced back at the store where the manager was watching nervously through the window. I should have a word with him before I go. Raymond nodded, then hesitated. The men we lost that day, Diaz and Murphy, their families never knew how they died. Just that it was in service to their country. No details. That could be corrected too, if you think it should be. They deserve to know their sons died heroes, Raymond said quietly. Not just statistics in a war nobody wanted to remember. James nodded. I'll make sure that's part of the review. As Raymond turned to leave, James added, One more thing, Miss G. Wilson, I've made some calls to fellow officers. Word is spreading about your situation. What do you mean? The military brotherhood runs deep. Once officers learn about a decorated veteran living in these conditions, denied proper recognition and benefits, well, let's just say people want to help. Raymond's expression hardened. I don't want charity? Not charity, James corrected. Support from fellow soldiers, the same support you'd have offered if positions were reversed. Before Raymond could respond, James's phone rang. He checked the screen. Excuse me, I need to take this. It's Colonel Harrington. Raymond nodded and began walking toward the bus stop, his slight limp more pronounced today. James answered the call. Yes, sir. Mercer, things are moving faster than expected. I spoke with General Waldron at the Pentagon. He served in Vietnam himself later in the war. When I told him about Operation Southpaw and Sergeant Wilson, He took a personal interest. He's expediting the review. That's excellent news, sir. There's more. Once word got around about a Vietnam vet who'd been denied recognition all these years, several officers volunteered to help. The Veterans Affairs Liaison is reviewing his benefits case. And some of the 173rd Veterans groups want to get involved. James watched Raymond waiting at the bus stop, a solitary figure whose stoic demeanor masked decades of quiet suffering. Sir, what's the timeline on this review? Hard to say. Bureaucracy moves at its own pace. But with General Waldron involved, I'd expect movement within weeks rather than months. Thank you, sir. That's much faster than I anticipated. After ending the call, James returned to the store for his promised conversation with the manager. The brotherhood he'd described to Raymond was already mobilizing, a network of current and former military personnel who understood the sacred obligation to honor sacrifices made in service to the country. Raymond Wilson had been forgotten by his community, but he had not been forgotten by his brothers in arms. Not anymore. 1 week later, James received a call from Raymond. The older man's voice was hesitant, almost formal in its careful phrasing. Captain Mercer, I've been thinking about your request, about the mission. If you're still interested, I'm willing to talk about it. James had been preparing for a training exercise but immediately rearranged his schedule. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Would you prefer I come to your apartment? No, Raymond replied. Too many ghosts there. There's a place called Veterans Park, on the east side of town. Quiet this time of year. Noon tomorrow? I'll be there, sir. The following day, James arrived at the small park 15 minutes early. Despite its name, Veterans Park had no monuments or military memorials, just a few benches, some trees, and a modest playground that had seen better days. Raymond was already there, seated on a bench overlooking a small pond. He wore his Vietnam's veteran cap and a worn but clean jacket against the autumn chill. James, in civilian clothes, out of respect for the private nature of their conversation, approached and sat beside him when Raymond gestured to the empty space on the bench. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Raymond seemed to be gathering his thoughts, preparing himself to revisit memories long buried. James waited patiently, understanding that some stories couldn't be rushed. February 17, 1969, Raymond finally began, his voice steady but distant, as if reciting facts about someone else's life. A reconnaissance pilot went down near the Laotian border. Intelligence said he was alive but injured, had sensitive information about North Vietnamese troop movements. James nodded but didn't interrupt. Our unit was closest. 6 of us volunteered for the extraction. Me, Murphy, Diaz, Tanner, Washington, and Brooks. Special op, completely off. The books because we weren't supposed to be operating in Laos. Raymond paused, his gaze fixed on the pond, but clearly seeing something else entirely. They gave us civilian clothes to wear under our uniforms in case we were captured. Plausible deniability for the government. He fell silent again, and James recognized the weight of classified information still held secret after all these years. You don't have to share operational details if you're not comfortable, Mr. Wilson. Raymond shook his head slightly. Doesn't matter now. Statute of limitations on those secrets expired a long time ago. He took a deep breath and continued. We moved at night, 20 miles through the heaviest jungle you can imagine. Monsoon season, rained so thick you could barely see 5 feet ahead. Mud up to your knees in some places. James could almost feel the oppressive heat, hear the constant drumming of rain on the triple canopy jungle. Found the pilot on the second day. Broken leg, dehydrated but alive. We started back immediately. That's when everything went to hell. Raymond's hands, resting on his knees, tightened almost imperceptibly. NVA patrol spotted us about 5 miles from the border. We scattered, planned to regroup at a predetermined location. Murphy and Diaz took the pilot. The rest of us provided diversion. Raymond fell silent again, longer this time. When he continued, his voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. They caught Murphy, Diaz, and the pilot. We heard the shooting. Washington wanted to go back for them. But it would have been suicide. We held him back physically. Then we heard the screaming. James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. It went on for hours. They were trying to draw us out. We stayed hidden, listening to our friends. Raymond swallowed hard. The next morning, we found what was left of them, the pilot too. They'd taken their time. "I'm sorry," James said quietly. Raymond nodded once, acknowledging, but not dwelling on the sympathy. We were 3 men now, deep in enemy territory, no extraction plan. Washington was hit during our next encounter. Not bad, but enough to slow us down. We carried him 15 miles back to South Vietnam, took us 3 days, lived off the land, moved only at night. "That's extraordinary," James said. "That's survival," Raymond corrected. "When we finally made it back to base, things got complicated. The mission officially never happened. The pilot was never there. We were told that acknowledging the operation would create an international incident. Vietnam was political by then. Everything was about optics," James nodded. "And that's when the medals were mentioned? Our CO put us in for Silver Stars, said it would happen once the classification period ended. Washington got his eventually. He stayed in, made a career of it, died in Desert Storm as a master sergeant. Brooks got his too, I heard. But mine, the paperwork vanished. Every time I followed up, it was a different excuse. And after a while, you stopped trying," James suggested. Raymond's weathered face showed a flicker of emotion. "Eleanor, my wife, she kept pushing me to fight for it, not for the medal itself, but for what it represented. After she died, I didn't have the energy anymore. Seemed pointless." "It's not pointless," James said firmly. "Recognition matters, and in your case, it's tied to benefits you should have received decades ago." Raymond turned to look directly at James for the first time since beginning his story. "You found the paperwork. After 50 years you found it. How?" "It was misfiled. Bureaucratic error. But once I knew what to look for, it wasn't impossible to track down. And now? Now the review is in process. General Waldron at the Pentagon is personally overseeing it. He's a Vietnam veteran himself." Raymond nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "The other day at the store, you called me a Silver Star recipient. You were pretty confident for a man dealing with military bureaucracy." James smiled slightly. "Sometimes you have to speak things into existence, Mr. Wilson." For the first time since they'd met, Raymond smiled, a genuine expression that momentarily erased decades from his face. "You remind me of my lieutenant, young, idealistic. Thought he could change the system from within. What happened to him? Last I heard, he was in Congress, still fighting the good fight." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching a pair of ducks glide across the pond's surface. "Thank you for sharing your story," James finally said. "It will make a difference in the review process." Raymond nodded, then asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. What happens if they approve it, after all this time? Then, Sergeant Raymond Wilson receives the recognition he earned in 1969, along with the back benefits he should have received all these years. James paused, then added, "And a community learns that a hero has been living among them unnoticed." Raymond looked away. "I'm no hero, Captain. I just did what needed doing." "With all due respect, sir, that's exactly what makes you one." News of Raymond's story began to spread through the small town of Riverdale. It started with Melissa from the convenience store, who had witnessed both Raymond's humiliation and James's intervention. She mentioned it to her boyfriend, who worked at the local newspaper. Though no formal article was written yet, James had asked for discretion until the military review was complete. Whispers and rumors circulated. James decided it was time to address the situation more directly. He arranged a meeting with Mayor Davidson, a career politician known more for his golf game than his civic leadership. The mayor's office was wood-paneled and adorned with photographs of Davidson shaking hands with various dignitaries, carefully curated evidence of his importance. "Captain Mercer," Davidson greeted him with practiced warmth, "what brings the military to my humble office today? Planning a parade?" James remained standing until invited to sit. "No parade, sir. I'm here about a resident of Riverdale, Sergeant Raymond Wilson, Vietnam veteran, Bronze Star and Purple Heart recipient, and soon to be recognized with the Silver Star for valor. The mayor's smile remained fixed, but his eyes showed no recognition of the name. Wonderful news. Always happy to hear about our local heroes. That's just it, Mr. Mayor. Sergeant Wilson has lived in Riverdale for 12 years, and I don't believe he's ever been recognized as the hero he is. In fact, based on my observations, he's been systematically overlooked and occasionally mistreated by this community. The mayor's smile faltered. That's a serious accusation, Captain. Riverdale prides itself on supporting our veterans. We have a Veterans Day ceremony every year. A ceremony Sergeant Wilson has never been invited to, despite his distinguished service record. Well, I'm sure that's an oversight. We can certainly include him this year. James leaned forward slightly. Mr. Mayor, this isn't about a ceremonial inclusion. It's about how a decorated combat veteran has been treated by his community. He lives in substandard housing because his service-connected disability benefits were denied due to classified aspects of his service. He counts quarters to pay for heart medication, and he's treated with indifference or outright disrespect by local businesses. The mayor's discomfort was now evident. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do about private businesses or federal benefits. I'm addressing the benefit situation through military channels. What I'm asking from you, as the leader of this community, is to acknowledge that Riverdale has failed one of its heroes and to take concrete steps to change that culture. That seems rather dramatic for one isolated case. It's not isolated, James interrupted. Raymond Wilson is just the most egregious example I've encountered. How many other veterans live in Riverdale, Mr. Mayor? I don't have that figure. At my fingertips, 342, James supplied. I checked the census data. How many are represented on your Veterans Affairs Committee? The mayor shifted uncomfortably. We don't currently have a dedicated Veterans Affairs Committee. Precisely my point. Mayor Davidson's political instincts finally engaged. What exactly are you proposing, Captain? 3 things. First, establish a Veterans Affairs Committee with actual veterans in leadership positions. Second, implement a community education program about military service and the challenges veterans face. And third, lead by example in how you personally interact with and acknowledge veterans like Sergeant Wilson. The mayor considered this, visibly calculating the political capital involved. The budget for new committees is tight. This isn't about budget, James said firmly. It's about recognition and respect. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. The mayor's assistant entered with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Gaines from the convenience store chain is here. He seems quite upset about something involving a veteran and a military officer. He's demanding to speak with you immediately. James and the mayor exchanged glances. Send him in, Davidson said. Frank Gaines, regional manager for the convenience store chain, burst into the office with barely contained indignation. He was mid-sentence before he realized James was present. Completely unacceptable for a military officer to threaten one of our store managers with. He stopped abruptly, recognizing James. You, Mr. Gaines, James acknowledged calmly. I don't believe I threatened your manager. I simply pointed out that the treatment of Sergeant Wilson was disrespectful and suggested that your company might want to reconsider its approach to veterans. You told him our corporate office would be hearing about the incident and implied there would be consequences. I stated facts. Your corporate marketing materials prominently feature your company's supposed support for military personnel and veterans. Your manager's treatment of Sergeant Wilson directly contradicted those claimed values. The mayor, sensing a potential political minefield, intervened. Gentlemen, perhaps we can discuss this calmly. Captain Mercer was just sharing his concerns about how veterans are treated in our community. Gaines turned to the mayor. This officer has been interfering with our business operations and making accusations about our company policies. We've always supported veterans. We even put those yellow ribbon magnets on our delivery trucks. James maintained his composure. Mr. Gaines, symbolic gestures like magnets are meaningless if they're not backed by respectful treatment of actual veterans. Your store manager publicly humiliated a decorated combat veteran who was simply trying to pay for his medication. According to whom? Gaines demanded. According to security camera footage that your own employee, Melissa, referenced when she contacted me about the incident. Footage I'm certain your corporate office would find enlightening, especially if it were shared with local media alongside Sergeant Wilson's service record. The implied threat hung in the air. Mayor Davidson, recognizing the potential for a public relations disaster that could engulf both the store chain and City Hall, stepped in again. Mr. Gaines, Captain Mercer, I think we all want the same thing here, to ensure our veterans are treated with the respect they deserve. Perhaps instead of focusing on past incidents, we could discuss how to move forward constructively. Gaines, still fuming but aware of the optics, grudgingly nodded. Excellent, the mayor continued, seizing the opportunity to position himself as a mediator and problem solver. Captain Mercer has suggested creating a Veterans Affairs Committee. Mr. Gaines, perhaps your company would be interested in supporting such an initiative? James watched as the conversation shifted from confrontation to politically expedient cooperation. It wasn't the principled stand he had hoped for, but it was a start. Raymond Wilson's story was beginning to force the community to examine its treatment of veterans, one uncomfortable conversation at a time. Raymond noticed the changes gradually. First, it was the convenience store staff, suddenly overly solicitous, greeting him by name when he entered, offering assistance he hadn't asked for. Then the diner, where he was unexpectedly seated at a prime table by the window instead of his usual spot near the kitchen. The librarian, always kind, now made a point of setting aside military history books she thought might interest him. Something had shifted in Riverdale, and Raymond couldn't shake the feeling that Captain Mercer was behind it. On a crisp Thursday morning, Raymond was returning from the park when he noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked outside his apartment building, a black SUV with government plates. As he approached the entrance, two men in suits emerged from the building. They nodded respectfully as they passed him. Sergeant Wilson, one said, though Raymond was certain they had never met. Inside, Mrs. Petrovich, from apartment 3A, was waiting, by the mailboxes, practically vibrating with excitement. Mr. Wilson, those men were asking about you. They said they were from Washington. Are you in some kind of trouble? Raymond shook his head. No trouble, Mrs. Petrovich. Just some old military business being sorted out. They were very polite. Very official. She leaned closer. One showed me a Pentagon ID card. Raymond thanked her for the information and continued to his apartment, unsettled by the unexpected visitors. Captain Mercer had warned him the review was in process, but he hadn't anticipated government agents visiting his residence. He had just settled in his recliner when his phone rang, an unusual occurrence in itself. Few people had his number, and fewer still ever called. Wilson, he answered. Sergeant Wilson. This is Colonel Robert Brooks, United States Army, retired. Raymond sat up straighter, the name triggering memories long buried. Brooks? From the 173rd? The same. Been a long time, Ray. 50 years compressed into a moment. Raymond closed his eyes, seeing again the young soldier who had traversed the Laotian jungle alongside him, who had helped carry Washington those grueling 15 miles back to friendly territory. How did you find me? Brooks chuckled. Wasn't hard. Young Army captain named Mercer contacted me, said he was helping straighten out an old injustice, something about a silver star that never made it to your chest. Raymond's grip tightened on the phone. He contacted you? Me and about half the surviving 173rd leadership from our era. Word's spreading, Ray. The old boys network is still alive and kicking. I never asked for this attention, Raymond said quietly. Of course you didn't. That's why you deserve it. Brooks paused. Listen, Ray, I got my Silver Star in 72. Washington got his in 75. Always wondered why you didn't get yours. Paperwork, Raymond said simply. Bullshit, Brooks replied. Politics and bureaucracy. But that's about to change. I'm flying in next week. So are a few others. Others? Tanner's coming. And General Waldron, he was a lieutenant when we were there. Different unit, but he's taking a personal interest in your case. Raymond struggled to process this information. Why would a general care about a 50-year-old medal dispute? Because some things matter, Ray. Because leaving no man behind doesn't stop when the war ends. Brooks paused again. And because that young captain of yours is one persuasive son of a gun. After saying goodbye to Brooks, Raymond sat motionless in his recliner. The quiet life he had built, the carefully maintained routines that structured his days, all of it was being disrupted by James Mercer's determined campaign to right a half-century-old wrong. Part of him wanted to call Mercer and tell him to stop, to let sleeping dogs lie. But another part, a part he had suppressed for decades, felt a flicker of something he barely recognized. Hope. The following day brought more surprises. As Raymond walked to the diner for breakfast, a military vehicle, an olive-drab Humvee with Army markings, drove slowly past him. The soldiers inside, a driver and passenger in crisp uniforms, nodded respectfully as they passed. At the diner, his usual waitress seated him by the window again. "Coffee, Sergeant Wilson?" she asked, using his rank for the first time. Before he could respond, the bell above the door chimed, and 3 men in Army dress uniforms entered. The diner fell silent as they approached Raymond's table. "Sergeant Wilson?" The highest-ranking officer, a lieutenant colonel, inquired. Raymond nodded, struggling to maintain his composure in the face of this unexpected military presence. "Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, sir. These are Captains Rodriguez and Chen. We're from Fort Dix, advance team for General Waldron. He sends his respects and looks forward to meeting you next week." The other diners watched in stunned silence as the officers spoke briefly with Raymond, their manner deferential, before departing with sharp salutes that Raymond instinctively returned. As the day progressed, more military vehicles appeared in Riverdale. A small convoy of 3 Humvees and 2 sedans with government plates parked near the town hall. Uniformed personnel and civilians with military bearing moved purposefully throughout the town. Local residents took notice. Speculation ran wild. Was there some kind of military exercise planned? A national security threat? Why was Riverdale suddenly crawling with Army personnel? By mid-afternoon, Mayor Davidson called an emergency meeting of the town council. James Mercer was invited to explain the sudden military presence. "Captain," the mayor began, his tone a mixture of concern and irritation, "our citizens are becoming alarmed. We've had dozens of calls to City Hall. What exactly is happening here?" James stood before the hastily assembled council, calm and composed. "Nothing to be alarmed about, Mr. Mayor. General Waldron and several high-ranking officers will be visiting next week to present a long-overdue commendation to a Riverdale resident. These advance teams are handling logistics and security. All. This for a commendation?" one councilwoman asked skeptically. "Not just any commendation," James replied. "A Silver Star for valor, awarded 50 years after the actions that earned it. The recipient is Sergeant Raymond Wilson, who has lived in your community for 12 years without recognition." The mayor's expression shifted as he realized the potential political opportunity. This sounds like a significant event. Perhaps the town should be involved in the ceremony. James nodded. General Waldron would welcome the community's participation. In fact, he specifically mentioned hoping to see Riverdale acknowledge one of its heroes. As the council meeting continued, Raymond Wilson sat in his apartment, unaware of the civic machinations unfolding on his behalf. He was staring at his shadow box of medals, at the empty space that had represented a half-century of bureaucratic neglect. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine that space filled. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. The announcement had appeared in the Riverdale Gazette on community bulletin boards and had been mentioned repeatedly on the local radio station. Special town meeting honoring Riverdale's heroes. Raymond had no intention of attending until James arrived at his apartment that afternoon. "I can't force you to come, Mr. Wilson," James said, standing respectfully in Raymond's small living room. "But I believe you should hear what General Waldron has to say." Raymond studied the younger man, noting the formal dress uniform he wore. "This is becoming a circus, Captain. Not what I wanted. I understand. But some stories deserve to be told. Some injustices need to be corrected publicly. After. A long moment, Raymond nodded. All right, but I'm not speaking. No one will ask you to, James promised. They arrived at the town hall 30 minutes early, yet the parking lot was already full. A military honor guard stood at attention near the entrance. 2 Humvees and a black sedan with flags on the front. Fenders, indicating a general officer's vehicle, were parked in reserved spaces. Inside, the meeting room was packed beyond capacity. Raymond hesitated at the threshold, overwhelmed by the crowd. James remained at his side, a steadying presence. Mayor Davidson hurried over, hand extended. Sergeant Wilson, an honor to have you here tonight. We've reserved a front row seat for you. Raymond shook the offered hand reflexively, but said nothing as James guided him to the reserved seating area. There, several men in their 70s rose as he approached. Raymond froze, recognition dawning. Brooks? Tanner? The men nodded, emotions evident on their aged faces. Long time, Ray, Tanner said, his voice rough with feeling. Before Raymond could respond, a side door opened, and several high-ranking officers entered. The room quieted immediately. Mayor Davidson took the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this special town meeting. We are honored to have distinguished guests with us tonight, including General Howard Waldron from the Pentagon. The general, a trim man in his 70s with silver hair and the erect posture of a career soldier, nodded acknowledgement. Tonight is about recognizing a hero in our midst, the mayor continued, a man who has lived quietly among us for 12 years, his extraordinary service to our nation, unknown to most of us. Raymond sat stiffly in his seat, uncomfortable with the attention. Brooks placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. The mayor introduced General Waldron, who approached the podium with the measured steps of a man accustomed to command. Thank you, Mayor Davidson. Citizens of Riverdale, I'm here tonight to correct a 50-year injustice. The general's voice filled the room without apparent effort. In February 1969, a special operations team from the 173rd Airborne Brigade undertook a classified mission to rescue a downed pilot in denied territory. That mission, codenamed Operation Southpaw, remained classified for decades. A murmur ran through the crowd. 3 members of that team, Sergeants Raymond Wilson, Robert Brooks, and William Tanner, are with us tonight. All eyes turned to the front row. The team ventured 20 miles behind enemy lines, located the pilot, and attempted extraction under the most adverse conditions imaginable. They encountered heavy enemy resistance. 2 team members, Sergeants Diaz and Murphy, were captured and killed. Despite this loss, the surviving team members continued the mission. General Waldron paused, his gaze finding Raymond. Sergeant Wilson was wounded during the extraction, but continued to provide covering fire, while his teammates carried an injured comrade 15 miles to friendly territory. His actions were recommended for the Silver Star, our nation's 3rd highest decoration for valor. The general held up a document. This is the original recommendation, signed by their commanding officer. Due to the classified nature of the operation, this commendation was held in administrative limbo. When the classification period ended, the paperwork was misfiled. For 50 years, this recognition remained unprocessed, a bureaucratic oversight that denied Sergeant Wilson the honor he earned through blood and courage. Another murmur, louder this time, swept through the room. Recently, this oversight was brought to our attention by Captain James Mercer. The general nodded toward James. Following a thorough review, the Department of the Army has confirmed the original recommendation. Additionally, a review of Sergeant Wilson's VA benefits has been conducted, revealing that his service-connected disabilities were inadequately addressed due to the classified nature of operations in which he participated. Raymond's hands gripped his knees tightly. Brooks and Tanner flanked him like protective sentinels. Before I proceed with the formal presentation, General Waldron continued, I believe it's important for this community to understand who has been living among you. The general gestured, and a young lieutenant stepped forward with a laptop. A projection screen descended from the ceiling. With Sergeant Wilson's permission, obtained through his legal representative, we've prepared a brief presentation of his service record. Raymond shot a questioning glance at James, who nodded reassuringly. The screen illuminated with a black and white photograph of a young Raymond in uniform, standing tall and proud with his unit. Raymond Wilson enlisted in 1967 at age 18. He volunteered for airborne training and was assigned to the 173rd Airborne Brigade. During his tour in Vietnam, he participated in 27 combat operations. The presentation continued with sanitized descriptions of Raymond's service, focusing on his acknowledged achievements and decorations. The audience sat in rapt attention as the narrative unfolded, the story of a young man who had served with distinction in an unpopular war, returned home to build a quiet life, and never sought recognition for his sacrifices. When the lights came back up, Mayor Davidson returned to the podium, visibly moved. I believe I speak for all of Riverdale when I say we had no idea of the hero in our midst. He turned to Raymond. Sergeant Wilson, on behalf of our community, I offer both congratulations on this long overdue recognition and an apology for our failure to properly honor your service until now. Raymond nodded once, uncomfortable with the attention, but acknowledging the sentiment. General Waldron stepped forward again. Mayor Davidson, citizens of Riverdale, there is one more aspect to this story that must be addressed. He looked directly at Raymond. Sergeant Wilson's treatment in this community has been brought to our attention. The incidents at local businesses, the substandard housing, the general invisibility of his struggles. These do not reflect how America should treat its heroes. The crowd shifted uncomfortably as the general's words hit home. I challenge Riverdale to do better, not just for Sergeant Wilson, but for all veterans in your community. Let this ceremony mark the beginning of a new chapter in how you recognize and support those who served. In the front row, Raymond sat motionless, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of his decades-long invisibility. For the first time since Eleanor's death, he felt seen, not just acknowledged, but truly seen for who he was and what he had sacrificed. 2 days after the town hall meeting, Riverdale Central Square was transformed. American flags lined the perimeter. A small stage had been erected with a podium bearing the Department of the Army seal. Rows of chairs faced the stage, nearly all filled despite the morning chill. Raymond sat in his apartment staring at the dress uniform James had arranged to have delivered the previous day. It had been tailored to fit his older frame, with spaces for his existing medals and room for the one to be presented today. He ran his fingers over the fabric, memories flooding back of another uniform, another time, Eleanor helping him dress. For military functions, carefully arranging his ribbons, beaming with pride as they attended unit ceremonies together. How she would have loved to see this day. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. James stood outside in his dress uniform, cap tucked precisely under his arm. "Ready, Sergeant Wilson?" Raymond nodded. "As I'll ever be." In the small bathroom, Raymond changed methodically, the familiar routine of military dress coming back to him despite the decades that had passed. When he emerged, James stood at attention and offered a crisp salute. "Sergeant Wilson, your transportation awaits." Outside, a gleaming black sedan with flags on the fenders waited. A young lieutenant held the rear door open. Raymond hesitated, the formality of the moment almost overwhelming. "This is all too much," he murmured. "No, sir," James replied quietly. "It's what should have happened 50 years ago." The drive to the town square took only minutes. As they approached, Raymond could see the crowd had grown beyond the seated area, with people standing 3 deep around the perimeter. Military personnel from various branches formed an honor guard. A small band played softly. The sedan pulled up to a red carpet that had been laid from the street to the stage. As Raymond emerged, a command rang out. "Present arms!" The assembled military personnel saluted in unison. The civilians in the crowd stood, many with hands over hearts. Raymond straightened instinctively, his body remembering what his mind had. Tried to forget, James walked beside him as they approached the stage. There, General Waldron waited, along with Brooks and Tanner, both in Veterans Organization uniforms adorned with their own medals. Mayor Davidson stood nearby, uncharacteristically subdued in the presence of so much military ceremony. Raymond took his place on the stage. From this vantage point, he could see the entire crowd. The convenience store manager stood near the front, his expression contrite. Melissa beside him, smiling encouragingly. The diner waitress who had recently begun calling him Sergeant was there with several co-workers. The librarian, who had always been kind, waved slightly when she caught his eye. More surprising were the faces he didn't recognize. Dozens, perhaps. Hundreds of Riverdale citizens who had never noticed him before, now present to witness his recognition. General Waldron stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today to present a long overdue decoration to a true American hero." The general briefly recounted the now declassified details of Operation Southpaw. He described the harrowing journey through enemy territory, the loss of 2 team members, the rescue mission that had saved a downed pilot's life. Sergeant Wilson's actions during those 5 days exemplified the highest traditions of military service. His courage under fire, his refusal to abandon a wounded comrade, his leadership in the most adverse conditions imaginable, these qualities represent the very best of America's fighting forces. Raymond stood at attention, his face impassive, despite the emotions churning inside him. Brooks and Tanner flanked him, a physical reminder of the bond forged in combat that had never truly broken, merely stretched across time and distance. "It is my profound honor," General Waldron continued, "to present the Silver Star to Sergeant Raymond Wilson for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States." The general moved to stand before Raymond. An aide approached with a small case containing the Silver Star Medal. General Waldron removed it with careful reverence. Sergeant Raymond Wilson, for gallantry in action, while engaged in military operations involving conflict with an opposing foreign force, I present you with the Silver Star. The general pinned the medal to Raymond's uniform, then stepped back and rendered a sharp salute. Raymond returned it with equal precision. The crowd erupted in applause. Many stood, including several elderly men wearing veterans' caps from various eras: Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War. They saluted Raymond, one generation of warriors acknowledging another. General Waldron returned to the podium. "In addition to the Silver Star, I am authorized to present Sergeant Wilson with this document, signed by the Secretary of the Army, acknowledging the administrative error that delayed his recognition and confirming the award of appropriate benefits related to his service-connected disabilities." Another aide stepped forward with an official envelope, which the general presented to Raymond. "On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service, Sergeant Wilson." Raymond accepted the envelope with a steady hand. When invited to the podium, he hesitated, having maintained throughout the planning that he would not speak. But standing there, seeing the faces of his community, many apologetic, some proud, all attentive, he changed his mind, his voice. When he finally spoke, was clear and strong, carrying across the hushed square. "I didn't do anything special, just tried to bring my men home." He paused, looking at Brooks and Tanner. "Not all of them made it. This medal honors them more than me." Raymond touched the Silver Star now pinned to his chest. "My wife Eleanor always said this should have been made right. She's been gone 15 years now, but I think she'd be pleased to see it finally happen." He looked out at the crowd, at the town that had overlooked him for so long. "Thank you for being here today. It means more than you know." With that, he stepped back, the brevity of his remarks reflecting the quiet dignity that had sustained him through decades of invisibility. As the ceremony concluded and people began to approach the stage to congratulate him, Raymond felt a weight lifting, not just the burden of recognition denied, but the heavier burden of being forgotten. For the first time in years, he felt visible. For the first time since Eleanor died, He felt connected to something larger than his solitary routine. James stood nearby, watching with quiet satisfaction as the community finally embraced the hero in their midst. The ceremony changed Riverdale in ways both subtle and profound. Raymond noticed it first in small interactions, the respectful nods from strangers on the street, the way conversations paused briefly when he entered the diner, the occasional "thank you for your service" offered by people who had previously looked through him as if he were invisible. 1 week after the ceremony, Frank Gaines, the regional manager of the convenience store chain, requested a meeting with Raymond. They sat in a small coffee shop downtown, away from the store where Raymond had been humiliated. "Sergeant Wilson," Gaines began as earlier. Hostility replaced by careful deference. "I want to personally apologize for how you were treated in our store. It was unacceptable and doesn't reflect our company's values." Raymond studied the man's face, searching for sincerity beyond the corporate damage control. "Apology accepted," he said simply. Gaines seemed surprised by the easy forgiveness. "We'd like to do more than just apologize. Our company is implementing a veterans discount program in all our stores, properly documented this time. And we're making a donation to establish a veterans support fund here in Riverdale." "That's good to hear," Raymond replied. "Though I hope it's not just because a general officer got involved." Gaines had the grace to look embarrassed. "I won't pretend the attention didn't accelerate things, but the program was overdue regardless." After Gaines left, Raymond remained at the coffee shop watching the town's daily routines through the window. Something fundamental had shifted in how he perceived Riverdale and in how it perceived him, the isolation that had defined his existence. Since Eleanor's death had begun to crack, letting in glimpses of community. The next day brought another surprise. Mayor Davidson and 2 council members arrived at Raymond's apartment without warning. The mayor, clearly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings, explained their visit. "Sergeant Wilson, the town council has unanimously approved the establishment of a Veterans Affairs Committee with a dedicated budget and office space in City Hall. We'd like you to serve as honorary chairman." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Honorary? Meaning no actual responsibilities?" The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we thought at your age—" "I'm old, not incapable," Raymond interrupted. "If you want me involved, it should be in a meaningful capacity." One of the council members, a woman in her 50s named Helen Garrett, spoke up. "I agree. Sergeant Wilson should be offered a regular position if he's interested. His perspective would be invaluable." Davidson looked momentarily flustered, but recovered quickly. Of course. A full voting position on the committee. We'll adjust the proposal accordingly." After they left, promising to send formal documentation, Raymond sat in his recliner, considering the offer. He had avoided civic engagement for years, preferring the predictable solitude of his routines, but something about James Mercer's determined advocacy had awakened a part of him long dormant, the part that believed in service beyond self. The following Sunday, Raymond attended services at Riverdale Community Church for the first time. He sat in the back, uncomfortable with the attention his presence generated. After the service, several congregation members approached to introduce themselves, including the pastor. "We're honored to have you join us, Sergeant Wilson." "Pastor," Robert said, clasping Raymond's hand warmly. "I must confess, I've been in Riverdale for 8 years and never knew we had a Silver Star recipient in our community." "Just got the medal recently," Raymond reminded him. "And I wasn't advertising before that. Even so, we should have been more aware of our veterans' needs." The pastor hesitated, then added, "We're forming a veterans support group that will meet weekly. Nothing formal, just a chance for veterans to connect. Would you consider attending?" Raymond found himself agreeing before he had fully processed the invitation. The most surprising transformation came from the convenience store manager, Michael Torres. He approached Raymond outside the diner one morning, visibly nervous. "Sergeant Wilson, I owe you the biggest apology. The way I treated you that day, there's no excuse." Raymond regarded him steadily, but said nothing. "My grandfather was in Vietnam, too," Torres continued. 101st Airborne. He died when I was young. Seeing your ceremony, hearing your story, it made me realize I dishonored his memory by how I treated you." The young man's sincerity was evident in his voice and posture. Raymond softened slightly. "Your grandfather would understand. We all make mistakes. I'd like to make it right, if you'll let me. I'm starting a delivery service for elderly and disabled customers who can't easily get to the store. No delivery fee, no minimum purchase. I was hoping you might help spread the word to other veterans who could use the service." Raymond considered the offer. "That sounds worthwhile. I know several vets in my apartment building who struggle with mobility." Torres brightened. "I'll bring you some flyers tomorrow if that's okay." As the manager walked away, Raymond reflected on how a single act of recognition had rippled through the community, changing not just how others saw him, but how they saw themselves in relation to veterans like him. The most meaningful change came 3 weeks after the ceremony. Raymond received an official letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. His case had been reviewed, and his disability rating had been increased significantly based on the newly declassified information about his service. The back pay alone was substantial enough to change his circumstances completely. That evening, James visited to help Raymond understand the implications. "This means you don't have to live here anymore," James explained, gesturing to the small apartment. "You could afford a proper house or a better apartment at minimum." Raymond looked around at the space that had been his home for 12 years. "It's not much, but it's familiar." "At least consider your options," James suggested. "The increased monthly benefits mean you won't have to count quarters for medication anymore." Raymond nodded, the reality of his changed circumstances still sinking in. Eleanor always said things would be made right, eventually. "I stopped believing that a long time ago." "She was right," James said simply. As Raymond walked James to the door, he asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Why did you do all this, Captain? You didn't know me, didn't owe me anything." James considered his answer carefully. "When I saw how you were treated that day in the store, I saw something broken in how we honor our commitments as a nation. I couldn't fix the whole system, but I could try to fix this one injustice." "Well," Raymond said, extending his hand, "Eleanor would have liked you." Coming from Raymond, there was no higher praise. Raymond's story didn't remain confined to Riverdale for long. A reporter from the local newspaper had covered the ceremony, publishing a detailed account of Operation Southpaw and the 50-year delay in recognition. The article caught the attention of a regional news station, which sent a crew to interview Raymond. He had been reluctant at first, his natural inclination toward privacy warring with the growing sense that his experience might help other veterans. James had gently encouraged him. "Your story could make a difference for others in similar situations," he had pointed out. "There are likely hundreds of veterans out there with unresolved awards or benefits issues tied to classified operations." So, Raymond had agreed, sitting stiffly in his small living room as the reporter asked questions about Vietnam, the delayed Silver Star, and his life since returning home. He answered honestly but sparingly, uncomfortable with casting himself as any kind of hero. When asked what message he had for other veterans facing similar bureaucratic challenges, Raymond had paused thoughtfully before answering. "Don't give up. The system is slow and sometimes broken, but there are still good people working within it. And if you don't have the energy to fight anymore, reach out to the younger generation of military personnel. They understand the obligation to leave no one behind." The interview aired on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, it had been picked up by national news outlets. By the weekend, Raymond's phone was ringing constantly with calls from veterans organizations, military advocacy groups, and other media outlets seeking follow-up interviews. Brooks and Tanner, who had returned to their respective homes after the ceremony, called to report similar media interest. The story of Operation Southpaw and the delayed recognition had struck a chord with the public. "They're calling it the 50-year Silver Star," Brooks told Raymond during one call. "It's putting pressure on the VA and Department of Defense to review other cases like ours. The most significant call came from a senior aide to a U.S. Senator who chaired the Veterans Affairs Committee. The senator wanted to meet with Raymond to discuss potential legislation addressing delayed recognition and benefits for veterans involved in classified operations. This could change things systemically, James explained when Raymond consulted him about the request. It's a chance to ensure what happened to you doesn't happen to others. Raymond agreed to the meeting, which was scheduled for the following month in Washington, D.C. When he expressed concern about the travel arrangements, James smiled. Already taken care of. The senator's office is handling everything, and I've been approved to accompany you as military liaison. The ripple effects continued to spread. A national veterans organization established the Raymond Wilson Advocacy Fund to help veterans navigate the complex benefit system. The convenience store chain, seeing the positive publicity generated by their new veterans program in Riverdale, announced its expansion to all stores nationwide. Most surprising to Raymond was the effect his story had on his former neighbors. In the apartment building, Mrs. Petrovich's grandson, a high school senior, interviewed Raymond for a class project on Vietnam. The interview led to a school-wide veterans recognition program, with Raymond as the guest of honor. The building's maintenance man, Mr. Gonzalez, revealed that his son was currently serving in Afghanistan. He brought the young soldier's most recent letter to show Raymond. He read about you online, Gonzalez explained proudly. Said it reminded him why their mission matters, knowing that America eventually makes things right for its veterans. Raymond's mail now regularly included letters from veterans across the country, sharing their own stories of bureaucratic challenges and asking for advice. He answered each one methodically, often directing them to the resources James had helped. Connect him with one letter particularly affected him, from the son of Murphy, one of the men lost during Operation Southpaw. The declassification of the mission had finally provided the family with details about how their father had died. For 50 years, we knew almost nothing, the letter read. Now we understand why he was honored posthumously. Thank you for keeping the promise to leave no man behind, even half a century later. Raymond read the letter several times, then carefully placed it in a folder with the others. Eleanor would have kept every one of them, he thought. She had always been better at connecting with people than he was. 6 weeks after the ceremony, Raymond was in Washington for the meeting with the senator. As he and James walked through the Capitol, people occasionally recognized him from the news coverage, not just staffers or military personnel, but ordinary visitors touring the building. Several approached to shake his hand or thank him for his service. Still feels strange, Raymond commented to James, being visible after so many years of being overlooked. You were always visible to those who mattered, James replied. Your team members, Eleanor. Now, everyone else is catching up. The meeting with the senator exceeded Raymond's cautious expectations. Instead of the brief photo opportunity he had anticipated, they spent over an hour discussing specific challenges faced by veterans of classified operations. The senator took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions about Raymond's experience with the VA system. Sergeant Wilson, your case has highlighted a significant gap in our processes, the senator said as the meeting concluded. I believe we can craft legislation to address this systematically. Would you be willing to testify before the committee when we hold hearings next month? Raymond glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, Senator, I would. As they left the Capitol, a light rain was falling. Raymond paused on the steps, looking out over the National Mall. So much had changed in the 2 months since that morning at the convenience store. His life, which had settled into lonely routine after Eleanor's death, had been completely upended in ways both challenging and rewarding. Having second thoughts? James asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Raymond shook his head. Just thinking about how one small moment can change everything. If you hadn't been in that store that morning, someone else would have noticed eventually, James suggested. No, Raymond said with certainty. They wouldn't have. That's the point. Sometimes it takes one person willing to see what others don't. As they walked toward their car, Raymond added, quietly, "Eleanor always said the measure of a society is how it treats those who sacrificed for it. Maybe we're improving that measure, one veteran at a time." 1 year to the day after their first encounter at the convenience store, Raymond and James met for coffee at the diner in downtown Riverdale. The difference in Raymond's appearance was striking. Gone was the hunched posture and wary expression. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, his clothes new but still modest. The Vietnam veteran cap remained, but it sat differently on his head now, a badge of honor rather than a silent plea for recognition. "Hard to believe it's been a year," James said, stirring his coffee. Raymond nodded, glancing around the diner, where he was now greeted by name and seated at his preferred table without asking. "Feels like a lifetime ago." In many ways, it was. The increased disability benefits had allowed Raymond to move from his cramped apartment to a small but comfortable house on the edge of town. The back pay had been substantial enough to provide security he hadn't known since Eleanor was alive. But the material changes were minor compared to the transformation in Raymond's place within the community. As honorary chairman of Riverdale's Veterans Affairs Committee, he now spent 3 days a week at the committee's office in City Hall, helping other veterans navigate the benefit system he had once found so impenetrable. "How many cases have you resolved now?" James asked. 14 locally, Raymond replied. The national program has helped over 200 veterans with similar classification issues. The legislation Raymond had testified for, now known as the Wilson Act, had passed with rare bipartisan support 4 months earlier. It established a streamlined review process for veterans whose recognition or benefits had been affected by the classified nature of their service. "I heard from Brooks yesterday," Raymond continued. "He's mentoring 3 Vietnam vets in his area through the review process." James smiled. The brotherhood in action. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael Torres, the former convenience store manager who had once humiliated Raymond. Torres now ran a veterans support initiative funded by his former employer, coordinating free delivery, services, and employment opportunities for veterans throughout the region. "Sergeant Wilson, Captain Mercer," Torres greeted them respectfully. "Just wanted to update you. We've hired 6 more veterans this month, 3 from Vietnam era, 2 from Gulf War, 1 from Afghanistan." Raymond nodded approvingly. "Good work. Michael, any challenges with the transition?" "Nothing we can't handle. The mentorship program you suggested is making a big difference." After Torres left, Raymond shook his head slightly. "Still can't get used to that. The same man who couldn't be bothered with me a year ago now runs a veterans program." "People can change when they're shown a better way," James observed. They finished their coffee and walked together toward the convenience store. It had become something of a tradition, revisiting the site of their first meeting on the monthly anniversary of that day. The store had changed too. A prominent sign in the window announced, "Proud supporters of American veterans, military discount every day." Inside, a bulletin board displayed information about veterans' resources and upcoming events. A framed newspaper article about Raymond and the Silver Star ceremony hung near the register. Melissa, now the assistant manager, waved to them from behind the counter. Several customers nodded respectfully as Raymond passed. "Captain Mercer," Raymond said as they exited the store, "I've been meaning to ask you something." "What's that?" "Why didn't you ever mention your father was a Vietnam vet too?" Brooks told me last month. James looked slightly embarrassed. "It didn't seem relevant to your situation." "But it was," Raymond pressed. "It's why you noticed the cap. That day, isn't it? Why you didn't just walk past like everyone else?" After a moment, James nodded. "My father struggled with similar issues. Classified operations, delayed recognition. He died before his case was resolved." Raymond stopped walking. "I'm sorry, James. I didn't know." "It's all right. In a way, helping you helped me come to terms with his situation." James smiled slightly. "He would have liked you." They resumed walking, comfortable in the momentary silence. "I've been offered a position at the Pentagon," James said eventually. "Veterans Advocacy Liaison, working directly with the implementation team for the Wilson Act." Raymond's eyebrows rose. "That's quite an opportunity." "It is. I'd be able to influence how the program works from the inside. You should take it, Raymond said without hesitation. You've got a gift for cutting through bureaucracy. More veterans would benefit from that talent. James nodded. I'm going to accept. I'll be moving to Washington next month. Riverdale will miss you, Raymond said, then added with characteristic directness. I'll miss you. I'll visit, James promised. And you'll be in Washington for the one-year review of the Wilson Act anyway. They reached the town square, where a new addition had been installed since their last walk. A simple stone monument bearing the names of local veterans from all conflicts, with a special section dedicated to those who had served in classified operations. Raymond's name was among them. Did you ever think, Raymond asked, studying the monument, that paying for an old man's groceries would lead to all this? James smiled. I just saw someone who deserved better than they were getting. The rest was just doing what was right. Eleanor used to say that doing the right thing, even in small ways, creates ripples we might never see the end of. Wise woman, Raymond nodded, touching the silver star pin he now wore on his jacket. The best part of all this isn't the medal or the benefits or even the legislation. What is it? For the first time since I lost her, I feel like Eleanor can see me again. Through all of this, through you and the others who finally noticed, I've become visible again. A young boy approached them, maybe 10 years old, clutching a school notebook. Excuse me, are you Sergeant Wilson, the Silver Star hero? Raymond smiled gently. I'm Raymond Wilson. What can I do for you, young man? I'm doing a school report on hometown heroes. Would you answer some questions for me? James started to step. A way to give them privacy, but Raymond gestured for him to stay. I'd be happy to help, Raymond told the boy. But you should interview Captain Mercer, too. He's the real hero of this story. The boy looked between them, confused. But you're the one who got the medal. Raymond placed a hand on James's shoulder. Some heroes earn medals. Others make sure those medals find their way home. As the three of them walked toward a nearby bench, Raymond reflected on how completely his life had transformed. From invisible to recognized, from isolated to connected, from forgotten to remembered, all because someone had refused to look away.